How does a man become family only after his net worth hits 20 million? Why did my adopted children suddenly invite me to a serious dinner the same day my financial records became public? And what happens when the man they ignored for years walks in with the one thing they never planned for, a real heir? Before we continue, we ask you to hit the hype button, subscribe, and like the video to help the channel grow. Tell us which city you are from in the comments. We would like to get to know our audience better. I sat in my home office long after the last email pinged through, the glow of 3 monitors painting the room in cold blue light. Outside, the city hummed with its usual Friday night energy, but in here, silence wrapped around me like a second skin. I had grown comfortable in it. Silence didn't ask for anything. Silence didn't suddenly remember you existed when convenient. The systems I designed ran quietly in server farms across 4 continents, handling logistics for corporations that never knew my name. That's how I preferred it. Invisible architecture, essential but unseen. The kind of work that made fortunes without fanfare, that built empires from the shadows while others took credit in boardrooms and press releases. My phone sat face down on the desk. I knew what was there without looking. 3 text messages from the last 6 months. One on my birthday, arriving at 11:47 p.m., clearly an afterthought squeezed in before midnight made them officially late. One on Christmas, generic enough to be copied and pasted. One today, different in tone, urgent in a way the others never were. I didn't check them immediately. Instead, I stood and walked to the kitchen where the coffee maker had already started its automatic evening cycle. The house felt large around me. Too large for one person, too empty for the life I once imagined filling it. 6 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms. A dining room table that seated 12 but hadn't hosted a meal for more than 2 in half a decade. The refrigerator hummed its steady mechanical song. The clock ticked with that particular rhythm that only becomes noticeable in deep silence. Somewhere upstairs, a small nightlight glowed in a bedroom I checked every evening before sleep. A ritual I never skipped, never rushed, never took for granted. I poured coffee into a plain ceramic mug, the same one I used every evening, its handle worn smooth by years of the same grip. I leaned against the counter and looked through the kitchen window at my neighbor's house, warm with family dinner light. Voices carried faintly across the narrow strip of lawn between our properties. Laughter, the clatter of dishes, the ordinary texture of people who called each other by name and meant it, who gathered around tables not out of obligation but out of genuine desire to share space and time. For 17 years, I raised 2 children who never called me dad. Not once. Not even accidentally. Not even in moments of fear or joy or surprise when formality should have dissolved into instinct. Marrow, they said. Just marrow. Like I was a distant uncle who appeared at holidays with wrapped presents and disappeared before dessert. Like I was a temporary roommate who happened to share their address. Like I was someone who provided transportation and tuition, but never quite earned the title that should have come automatically. That should have been the foundation of our entire relationship. Their mother tried in the early years when hope still felt reasonable. "He's your father now," she would say, her voice firm but tired, worn down by the constant need to remind them of what should have been obvious. They would nod and say nothing, their faces carefully blank. And the next morning it would be Marrow again, flat and transactional, a name stripped of warmth or recognition. I never corrected them. Maybe that was the mistake. Maybe I should have demanded respect instead of waiting for it to arrive naturally, should have insisted on the title, should have made it non-negotiable from the start. But I am not a man who demands. I observe, I calculate, I build systems that function regardless of human emotion, that operate on logic and structure rather than sentiment and hope. When she was gone 5 years ago, I thought shared loss might finally bridge the gap between us. Common sorrow. The kind of universal human experience that strips away pretense and forces people to see each other clearly. Instead, they attended the memorial service with the same distant politeness they brought to every family gathering, shook hands with relatives they barely knew, exchanged quiet condolences with strangers, and returned to their own lives within 48 hours. No lingering, no offers to help sort through her belongings, no questions about how I was managing or whether I needed anything. I received a card 3 weeks later, signed with both their names, no personal message. Just the printed sympathy text that came with the purchase, the kind of generic sentiment that could apply to anyone, that required no thought or effort or genuine emotion. The coffee burned my tongue. I welcomed it. Physical sensation, proof of being present in a moment rather than lost in memory. My phone vibrated on the counter, the sound harsh against the quiet. I glanced down at the screen, already knowing what I would find. The message was from my adopted son, 28 years old now, graduate degree from a prestigious university that I financed. corporate position at a firm that I helped him network into, expensive apartment downtown that I co-signed for but had never been invited to see, not even for the obligatory tour parents usually receive. Need to arrange a family dinner. Important. Let me know your availability. I read it 3 times, analyzing each word the way I would analyze code, looking for patterns and intentions. The word family stood out like a spotlight in a dark room. He had never used that word in a text before, never used it in conversation unless legally required, unless filling out forms that demanded clarification of relationships. The timing was interesting, suspicious even, though I tried not to jump to conclusions without data. 4 days ago, my financial records became part of a public disclosure related to a corporate acquisition. Not my choice, not something I would have ever volunteered, a legal requirement for the deal structure, an unavoidable consequence of the way modern business operates. My name appeared in documents filed with the Securities and Exchange Commission. Net worth estimates appeared in trade publications that specialized in tracking the movements of money and power. 22 million, they said. Conservative estimate, the articles noted. Likely higher when accounting for private holdings and intellectual property rights that couldn't be precisely valued. I had built that fortune quietly, methodically, without flash or announcement. Every system I designed, every contract I fulfilled, every innovation I patented had added another layer to a structure most people never saw. I lived in a nice house, but not a mansion. I drove a reliable car, but not a luxury vehicle. I dressed well, but not expensively. Nothing about my external life suggested the depth of resources I had accumulated, until 4 days ago, when it became public knowledge. And now, suddenly, urgently, I was being summoned to a family dinner. I set the coffee down and opened my calendar on my phone. The dinner invitation wasn't phrased as a question. It was a summons disguised as a request. They wanted something. They wanted it now. And for the first time in years, they remembered I existed as more than an obligatory contact in their phones. I thought about the small bedroom upstairs, the glow of the nightlight that I left on every night, not because he was afraid of the dark, but because I liked knowing that small space was warm and welcoming if he woke. The soft breathing of someone who actually needed me, who looked at me and saw not a provider but a father, who used the word naturally, automatically, without hesitation or discomfort. Then I typed a response, keeping it brief and neutral. Tuesday works, 7 p.m. You pick the place. I hit send and turned off the phone, cutting off any immediate follow-up, any attempt to engage in conversation that would reveal nothing while feeling like connection. The coffee had gone lukewarm. I poured it down the sink and rinsed the mug, setting it in the dish rack with the same careful precision I brought to everything. Order, structure, control over the small things when the large things felt chaotic. Upstairs, I could hear faint movement, small feet padding across carpet, a sleepy voice calling my name, not Marrow, but the other word, the one that mattered. Coming, I called back, and climbed the stairs toward the only relationship in my life that felt genuine. The parking garage smelled like oil and exhaust and the accumulated residue of thousands of vehicles passing through the same concrete space. I sat in my car with the engine off, watching the concrete pillars cast long shadows under the fluorescent lights that hummed with that particular frequency that exists only in underground spaces. The dinner was in 40 minutes. I wasn't late. I was never late. Punctuality was a form of respect, and even when I didn't respect the people I was meeting, I respected the principle. But I wasn't early either. No eager arrival, no anxious waiting in the restaurant lobby. I would arrive exactly on time, not a minute before, not a minute after. The invitation had come with a location attached, not a casual restaurant, not the kind of place where families gathered for birthdays or graduations or ordinary Tuesday nights. This was image. This was performance. A private dining room at a place that required reservations weeks in advance, that appeared in lifestyle magazines and social media posts from people who measured their worth in likes and shares. Interesting choice. Revealing, even. My adopted daughter had called 2 days after I confirmed my attendance, her voice carrying that practiced warmth that people in client-facing roles learn to deploy on command. That sounds genuine until you hear it enough times to recognize the pattern. "It'll be so good to see you," she said, the words flowing smoothly, rehearsed. "It's been too long." 6 months. 6 months since she last responded to a message I sent. 8 months since we were in the same room, at a holiday gathering she left early from, pleading work obligations that may or may not have been real. "We've been thinking," she continued, the plural doing heavy lifting, creating an illusion of unified decision-making, of conversations happening about me without my presence, "that we haven't done enough to stay connected. Family should be closer. Family." There it was again. the word they had avoided for years suddenly appearing with uncomfortable frequency. I let her talk. I had learned long ago that silence was often more revealing than questions. She filled the quiet space the way water fills cracks, rushing into every gap with explanations that didn't explain anything. She mentioned holidays we should spend together. She mentioned being better without defining what better meant or acknowledging what had been wrong before. She mentioned how proud they were of everything I had built, the accomplishment framed in terms of construction rather than character. Built, not who I was, what I had built. The distinction mattered. "We're really looking forward to Tuesday," she finished, and I could hear the smile in her voice, could picture the expression on her face. Professional, practiced, performative. The same smile she probably used with clients and colleagues, with people she needed something from but didn't necessarily care about. "See you then," I said, and ended the call before she could extend the conversation, before she could probe for information or try to establish a false intimacy that would make Tuesday easier for them. Now I sat in the garage and watched the clock on the dashboard tick toward 7. Each minute a small increment, each second a reminder that time moved forward regardless of human comfort or discomfort. My phone rested in the cup holder, face up this time, displaying the lock screen. 2 more messages had arrived over the past 48 hours. Small talk about weather and traffic patterns. The kind of conversational filler that people use when they want something but haven't asked for it yet, when they're building toward a request they hope will seem reasonable because of the preceding friendliness. I thought about the last time we shared a meal together, really together, in the same physical space rather than connected by screens and distance. 2 years ago, my birthday. They showed up with a card bought at a corner shop, the kind with generic messages about appreciation and respect that required no personal thought. They brought excuses about why they couldn't stay long, work, plans, traffic, a litany of reasons that all communicated the same message. Being here is an obligation, not a choice. The dinner lasted 37 minutes. I had timed it, not consciously, but because I couldn't help noticing when they arrived and when they stood to leave. 37 minutes out of 240 in a day. 37 minutes they could spare for the man who raised them. They didn't ask about my work. They didn't ask about my life. They didn't ask about anything that would require them to listen to an answer longer than a few sentences. Instead, they asked if I was doing okay, which is what people ask when they don't want a real answer, when they want to check a box marked "showed concern" and move forward. I said I was fine. They nodded, satisfied. We ate in near silence, the kind of quiet that feels heavy rather than comfortable, that makes every clink of silverware sound too loud. When the check came, I paid without comment. They didn't offer. They never offered. Not because they couldn't afford to split it or take turns, but because they had never seen me as someone who might appreciate the gesture, who might value the symbol of reciprocity. Then they left, and I sat alone at a table set for 3, watching the restaurant slowly empty around me as other families finished their meals and went home together. The memory tasted bitter, like medicine that worked but hurt going down. I checked the rearview mirror. My reflection looked back, steady and composed. 49 years old, gray threading through dark hair at the temples. Lines around the eyes that came from staring at screens in dim rooms, not from laughter or joy or the kind of life experiences people claim make aging worthwhile. I looked like a man who had learned to carry weight without showing it, who had mastered the art of appearing fine regardless of internal weather. Behind me, secured properly in the car seat that I had researched and installed with careful attention to safety ratings and crash test data, my 4-year-old son slept peacefully. Small hands curled against his chest. Face relaxed in that perfect stillness children achieve when the world hasn't yet taught them to worry or guard or perform. His breathing was soft and steady, the rhythm of complete trust. His existence was a fact they didn't know, a reality I had kept carefully hidden, not out of shame, but out of strategy. I had been careful, deliberate, meticulous in a way that came naturally to someone who built systems for a living. The pregnancy was managed through a private clinic 3 states away, far enough that our social circles would never overlap. The surrogacy contract included strict confidentiality clauses backed by financial penalties severe enough to ensure compliance. The birth was registered under my name alone, no other parent listed, no ambiguity about custody or rights, no announcements, no social media posts, no trace in the circles they moved through, in the networks where information spread like wildfire. Why the secrecy? Because I knew this moment would come eventually. Not this exact configuration, not this specific trigger, but some version of it. Some moment where their sudden interest would collide with my actual life, where the gap between what they assumed and what existed would become impossible to ignore. And I wanted to choose the timing. I wanted to control the revelation. I wanted them to walk into my reality rather than stumble across it accidentally. The clock hit 6:53, 7 minutes. I reached back and gently touched my son's hand where it rested against his chest. His fingers wrapped around mine instinctively, even in sleep, the automatic response of a child who knew he was safe. "Time to go," I whispered, keeping my voice low and calm. He stirred, eyes opening slowly, adjusting to the dim garage lighting. "Where are we?" "Dinner," I said, "with some people I used to know." He blinked, confused but trusting, his small face still soft with sleep. That was the difference. That was everything. He looked at me and saw safety, certainty, the kind of foundational trust that should exist between a father and child but somehow never formed with the other two, never took root despite years of effort. I unbuckled him and lifted him from the seat. He wrapped arms around my neck and rested his head on my shoulder, still half in dreams, his weight comfortable and familiar. We walked toward the elevator, our footsteps echoing on the concrete in a rhythm that felt purposeful. His breathing was soft and warm against my collar, a reminder of why I was here, why this mattered. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and we stepped inside. Stainless steel walls reflected our image back at us. A tall man in a simple but well-tailored jacket. A small boy in clean clothes, still drowsy but content. "Will there be dessert?" he asked, his voice muffled against my shoulder. "Maybe," I said, pressing the button for the restaurant level. The doors closed, and we rose toward whatever waited above. The bedroom upstairs had been carefully assembled over months, not in a frantic rush of nesting instinct, but through methodical planning and deliberate choices. Not desperate, not impulsive, just the steady accumulation of everything a child would need, built piece by piece with the same attention to detail I brought to every project. Pale blue walls, the color chosen after reviewing color psychology research about calming effects on young children, a small bookshelf filled with picture books and wooden puzzles, each one selected for developmental appropriateness and durability. A dresser with drawers that closed smoothly, no sharp corners, no pinched fingers. A rocking chair by the window where I sat most nights, reading until small eyelids grew heavy and breathing deepened into sleep. This was 3 years ago, when the room was still empty, still theoretical. Before the pregnancy, before the surrogacy, before any tangible proof existed that my plan was more than wishful thinking. I had stood in that empty room and made decisions the way I made all decisions. Research, analysis, comparison of options, paint colors tested on sample boards under different lighting conditions, furniture dimensions measured to ensure appropriate scale for a growing child, lighting fixtures that could dim for bedtime and brighten for play, installed with careful attention to electrical codes. I assembled everything myself. No help from friends, because the few I had were kept at professional distance. No assistance from family, because the family I had was exactly who I was preparing for this room to counterbalance. No witnesses to the transformation of empty space into nursery. My late wife had left behind frozen embryos, 7 of them, stored in a fertility clinic we had visited during her final year, when she still believed time might give us what nature had denied, when hope was still stronger than realism. She never got to use them. The illness that took her was aggressive and unforgiving, moving faster than our ability to fight it. She passed before we could try, before we could take that last chance at biological parenthood. But the embryos remained, suspended in liquid nitrogen, preserved against time. And the legal paperwork she had signed, thorough and notarized, gave me sole authority over their use. She had wanted this, even if she couldn't be here to see it. I waited 2 years before making the call. 2 years of silence in a house too large for one person. 2 years of watching my adopted children drift further into their own lives, their visits growing shorter, their messages more perfunctory, their interest in maintaining any real relationship evaporating like morning dew. 2 years of realizing that the family I thought I had built was a performance they had agreed to participate in only as long as it cost them nothing, only as long as someone else, their mother, was doing the emotional labor of holding it together. The clinic was professional, clinical in the best sense of the word. They asked the necessary questions without judgment and accepted the necessary answers without commentary. Yes, I understood the process. Yes, I had legal authority. Yes, I was financially prepared for single parenthood. Yes, I had considered the ethical implications. Yes, I was certain. They didn't ask why a man my age wanted to use his deceased wife's embryos to have a child he would raise alone. That wasn't their job. Their job was to verify legality and capability, and I met both requirements comfortably. The surrogacy agency was equally discreet, their professionalism honed by years of navigating complex family situations. A woman in her 30s, healthy, experienced with 3 previous successful surrogacies. willing to carry a child for someone she would never meet beyond contractual obligations. We spoke twice. Once to finalize terms and review medical protocols, once after the successful implantation, when the pregnancy test came back positive. "Congratulations," she said, her voice warm but professional, maintaining appropriate boundaries. "I'll take good care of him." Him? The pronoun felt like a weight and a gift simultaneously. A son. Not just a theoretical child, but a specific person, already growing, already becoming. I didn't tell anyone. Not friends, because explaining would require justifying, and I had no interest in justifying my choices to people who had no stake in the outcome. Not colleagues, because my personal life was exactly that. Personal. Not the two people who should have been the first to know if our relationship had been anything real, anything more than legal obligation masquerading as family. Instead, I prepared. I read books on child development written by experts with decades of research. I researched preschools and evaluated them based on curriculum quality and teacher credentials. I converted the guest room into a nursery, hanging blackout curtains and installing a white noise machine and arranging furniture according to safety guidelines. I learned to change items and mix formula and recognize the different types of crying that meant hunger versus tiredness versus discomfort versus pain. When he was born, I was there. Not in the delivery room, because the contract didn't require it and the surrogate preferred privacy, but in the hospital, waiting in the designated area. When the nurse brought him out, wrapped in standard issue blankets, his face red and wrinkled and absolutely perfect, I held him and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Certainty. Not happiness, though that would come. Not joy, though I would experience that too in countless small moments. But certainty. Pure, unambiguous certainty that this was right. That this mattered. That this was the most important thing I would ever do. Certainty that this was real in a way nothing had been real since my wife passed. Certainty that this mattered more than systems or money or the accumulated accomplishments of my career. Certain that whatever happened next, I had created something that couldn't be erased by indifference or rewritten by convenience. Now, 3 years later, standing in my home office the evening before the dinner, I placed a folder in my briefcase. The papers inside were organized by date and category, each one labeled and separated by color-coded tabs. Surrogacy contract with all amendments and addendums. Birth certificate with raised seal authenticating its legitimacy. Genetic testing results proving biological relationship. Trust documents drafted by expensive attorneys and reviewed multiple times for any possible ambiguity. Legal memorandums outlining custody, inheritance, and guardianship structures with contingencies for various scenarios. Everything documented. Everything witnessed by appropriate parties. Everything filed with relevant authorities and archived in multiple secure locations. My adopted children had no idea any of this existed. They had stopped asking about my life years ago. Their questions growing less frequent and more superficial until they disappeared entirely, leaving only the occasional "How are you?" that expected and received only "fine" in response. I had stopped volunteering information in return. Our conversations, when they happened, revolved around surface topics that required no depth or vulnerability. Weather patterns, traffic conditions, general health inquiries that never went deeper than confirming continued existence. They didn't know I had used the embryos, they didn't know about the surrogate, they didn't know about the birth or the first 3 years of development or any of the thousands of moments that had filled my life with actual meaning, and I had preferred it that way. Privacy, protection, control over what they knew and when they learned it. Until now. I closed the briefcase and locked it with a satisfying metallic click. The sound felt final, like the closing of a chapter or the sealing of a door. Tomorrow was the dinner. Tomorrow they would ask their questions and make their requests and explain why, suddenly, after years of distance and disinterest, they needed to be closer. Why family mattered now in a way it apparently didn't matter before. And tomorrow I would show them exactly what they had missed while they were busy forgetting I existed. I would show them the cost of conditional love. I would show them what happens when you treat a parent like a resource rather than a person. I would show them that choices have consequences, and some consequences can't be undone with sudden warmth and convenient guilt. Tomorrow they would learn that families built on performance collapse when the performance stops being necessary, and I would watch it happen with the same calm, methodical approach I brought to everything. The attorney's office occupied the 14th floor of a building downtown, the kind of address that signaled success through location alone. The lobby smelled like filtered air and expensive carpet, like money spent on creating an impression of stability and discretion. Everything was designed to inspire confidence. Heavy furniture, original art on walls, receptionists who spoke in hushed professional tones. I had been here 3 times in the past month. each visit adding another layer to the structure I was building, each meeting another step toward a conclusion I had been planning since the day my son was born. My attorney, a man named Whitfield, was exactly the kind of professional you wanted handling matters of consequence. Gray suit tailored to fit perfectly, thin-framed glasses that made him look scholarly without being academic, a desk organized with geometric precision, every item in its designated place. He spoke in complete paragraphs and billed in 6-minute increments, his time measured and accounted for with the same rigor he applied to legal strategy. "These are the final amendments," he said, sliding a document across the polished surface of his desk. His voice was neutral, neither approving nor disapproving, just factual. "The trust is irrevocable, once signed. All assets transfer according to the specified conditions. No ambiguity, no room for contest." I read through the pages slowly, despite having reviewed earlier drafts multiple times. Legal language is dense by design, built to prevent misinterpretation through excess precision. Every clause had subclauses. Every provision had exceptions to exceptions. But beneath the complexity, the core structure was clear and simple. Everything I owned, everything I had built over 30 years of work, everything I would accumulate between now and my passing, flowed through a single channel with no branches or alternatives. To my biological son, my only heir, the child who shared my genetic material and my late wife's legacy. No other beneficiaries listed anywhere in the 47 pages of documentation. No contingent heirs waiting in the wings. No clauses that created pathways for challenge or reinterpretation. No language that could be twisted by clever attorneys into meaning something other than what it clearly stated. "And the adoption status?" I asked, though I knew the answer. I had asked the same question during each previous visit, verifying consistency across multiple conversations. Whitfield nodded with the patient professionalism of someone accustomed to anxious clients seeking reassurance. "Legally distinct from biological parenthood. Adoptive children have no automatic inheritance rights unless explicitly included in estate documents. Since you've chosen to exclude them entirely, providing nothing, they have no legal claim to contest. The documentation supporting your biological son's status is comprehensive and would withstand any challenge. Birth certificate with hospital seal, genetic testing from an accredited laboratory, surrogacy contract witnessed and notarized, all filed with appropriate agencies and archived in multiple jurisdictions." I signed the document at the bottom of the signature page, my handwriting steady. Then I initialed each individual page where small tabs marked the required spots. Then I signed again at the bottom of the final page, the duplicate signature serving as confirmation of intent. Whitfield witnessed with his signature. His assistant, a serious woman in her 30s who had been silent throughout the meeting, witnessed as well. The papers were immediately scanned into digital systems, creating electronic copies with timestamps. Physical copies were made on heavy archival paper designed to last decades. Everything was filed in fireproof cabinets and backed up on secure servers. "You're certain about this structure?" Whitfield asked, the question more procedural than genuine inquiry. He had asked it before. He would note my answer in his records. "Yes." "Understood." He placed the documents in a folder marked with my name and case number. "The trust is active immediately upon your signature, which you've now provided. If you pass before your son reaches majority age, the designated trustee manages assets according to your explicit instructions until he turns 25. If you pass after he reaches majority, direct transfer occurs automatically. Clean succession, no probate complications." I stood, smoothing my jacket, shook his hand with a firm grip, left the office with the same measured pace I had entered. The elevator ride down felt longer than usual. I watched the numbers descend on the digital display above the doors, each floor a small increment toward ground level. 14, 13, 12. The descent felt symbolic, like crossing a threshold from one phase of life to another. My phone buzzed twice in my pocket. I pulled it out and glanced at the screen, messages from my adopted daughter. "Looking forward to tonight. We have so much to catch up on." I didn't respond. Responding would encourage further conversation, would create a false sense of warmth that would make the evening more uncomfortable when reality arrived. The parking garage was dim and cool, lit by the same harsh fluorescent lights that seemed to exist in every parking structure in every city. I found my car and sat in the driver's seat for a moment before starting the engine. The briefcase rested on the passenger seat, containing copies of everything I had just signed. Proof, documentation, the physical manifestation of choices made and futures determined. I thought about the first time I met them, my adopted children, back when they were just scared kids in a system that had failed them repeatedly. My adopted son was 11, his face guarded and suspicious. My adopted daughter was 14, already hardened by experiences no teenager should have. They stood in the social worker's office, wary and defensive, the way children learn to be when adults have repeatedly failed them, when promises have been broken so many times that believing becomes dangerous. "This is temporary," the daughter had said, her voice flat and emotionless. "We know how this works. We've been through it before." My late wife had knelt down to their level, her face open and kind, her eyes meeting theirs with genuine warmth. "Not temporary," she said gently but firmly. "Family, real family, for as long as you'll have us." They didn't believe her. I could see it in their faces, in the way they held their bodies rigid, ready to flee or fight. Belief was a luxury they couldn't afford. Hope was a liability that left you vulnerable. But my wife persisted with the same determination she brought to everything. She enrolled them in good schools, not just adequate ones, but places that would challenge them and prepare them for futures beyond what they had imagined. She attended every parent conference, sitting in small chairs meant for children, taking notes and asking questions. She learned their favorite foods and remembered their birthdays and created traditions that had never existed before. She built routines and rituals and all the small structures that create a sense of belonging, that transform a house into a home. I supported her efforts, financially, logistically, practically. I drove them to appointments and signed permission slips and paid for activities and equipment and opportunities. I was present in all the ways that could be measured and documented. I attended school events and sat in audiences and watched performances and games. I provided stability and structure and all the material things children need to thrive. But I was never dad. I was Marrow, the man who handled logistics, the one who made things possible but never quite made things warm, the provider who existed in the background while their mother occupied the foreground of their emotional lives. When my wife got sick, when the illness that would take her announced itself with symptoms that couldn't be ignored, I thought grief might finally bridge the gap between us. Shared loss, common pain, the kind of universal human experience that strips away pretense and forces people to see each other clearly, to recognize fundamental connections. Instead, they saw an ending. The woman who had made the family real, who had convinced them that belonging was possible, was leaving. And without her, what was I? Just the logistics man, just the financial support, just Marrow, the person who paid bills and provided transportation but never quite achieved the status of actual parent. They attended the funeral with the same distant politeness they brought to every family gathering. They shook hands with relatives they barely knew. They exchanged quiet condolences with strangers. They stood at the graveside with appropriate solemnity. And within 48 hours, they returned to their own lives, their own apartments, their own carefully constructed worlds that didn't include me except as an occasional obligation. I received a card 3 weeks later, both their names signed at the bottom. No personal message beyond the printed sympathy text that came with the purchase. Nothing handwritten, nothing specific, nothing that suggested they had actually thought about me or what I might be experiencing or whether I needed support. Just a card, mailed, fulfilled. The memory settled in my chest like a stone, heavy and cold. I started the engine and pulled out of the parking garage into evening traffic. The restaurant was 20 minutes away, through streets crowded with people heading home or heading out, living lives that intersected with mine only in these anonymous moments of shared space. I had time to prepare mentally, time to finalize the internal script I had been rehearsing for weeks, time to walk into a room where people who ignored me for years would suddenly perform interest and concern, and time to show them exactly what they had traded away for the comfort of distance, for the convenience of minimal contact, for the luxury of having a parent without having to actually be a child. The restaurant's exterior was all glass and warm light, the kind of place designed to be photographed and shared to create the impression of sophistication and taste. Couples walked in holding hands, dressed in outfits chosen specifically for this environment. Groups gathered near the entrance, voices bright with Friday evening energy, with the anticipation of good food and good company. I parked across the street and sat with the engine running, watching the scene through my windshield like observing a stage production. My son was awake now, fully alert, looking out the window with curious eyes that took in everything without judgment. "Is this where we're eating?" he asked, his voice carrying that particular tone children use when encountering something outside their normal experience. "Yes." "It looks fancy." "It is." He considered this information seriously, his small face thoughtful. "Will I need to be quiet?" "Just be yourself," I said, reaching back to check that his seatbelt was properly secured before we exited. I turned off the engine and came around to his door. He climbed out carefully, his movements deliberate, and his small hand found mine automatically. We crossed the street together at the crosswalk, waiting for the light, following the rules. His steps were quick to match my pace, his hand warm and trusting in mine. The host at the front desk recognized my name immediately when I gave it. "Mr. Marrow, your party is already here. Private dining room, second floor, I'll show you up." "I know the way," I said. He nodded, stepping aside with professional deference. We climbed the stairs together, my son taking each step with both feet before proceeding to the next. I didn't rush him. I never rushed him. Patience with children was easy when you actually wanted to spend time with them, when their pace felt natural rather than inconvenient. The hallway at the top was quiet, insulated from the main dining area by thick walls and careful acoustic design. Soft music played from hidden speakers, something instrumental and forgettable. Lighting was low, intimate, designed for private conversations and confidential business dealings. I found the door marked with our reservation name. Through the small window set at adult height, I could see them already seated. My adopted son on one side of the table, my adopted daughter on the other. Both dressed carefully in clothes that projected success and sophistication. Both wearing expressions of anticipation mixed with something harder to define. Nervousness, perhaps, or calculation. They hadn't seen me yet. I watched for a moment, studying their body language the way I would study data. The way they leaned forward slightly, ready for something. The way they checked their phones, then put them away, then checked again. The way they glanced at the door every few seconds, tracking time, wondering when I would arrive. They were nervous, definitely nervous. Good. I pushed open the door. The change was immediate and dramatic. Heads turned in unison. Eyes widened. Not at me, though they glanced at my face briefly, at the small hand holding mine, at the child they had no idea existed. My adopted son recovered first, his face smoothing into a neutral expression that didn't quite hide his shock. "Marrow, you're here." Not Dad. Never Dad. The word they had never used, even now, even when trying to make good impressions. "I am," I said, my voice level and calm. My adopted daughter stood, her chair scraping slightly against the floor. Her smile froze halfway through formation, stuck between genuine surprise and performed welcome. "And you brought someone." "My son," I said simply, offering no additional explanation, no context that would make this easier for them to process. The silence that followed was thick enough to feel, heavy enough to measure. They looked at me, at him, at each other. Complex calculations happening behind their eyes, assumptions being revised, plans being adjusted in real time. I pulled out a chair and helped my son climb into it. He settled in with the careful attention children bring to new situations, looking around with interest at the fancy table setting, the folded napkins arranged in precise shapes, the crystal water glasses that caught and reflected light. "I didn't know you had—" My adopted daughter trailed off, unable to finish the sentence, uncertain what word to use, what tone to strike. "Had what?" I asked mildly, letting her struggle. "A child." "I do." My adopted son found his voice, though it came out rougher than he probably intended. "How long?" "He's 4. More silence, longer this time. They were recalculating everything. I could see it happening. The numbers shifting in their mental spreadsheets, the plans they had made being mentally rewritten. Whatever they had prepared to say during this dinner was being revised completely, adapted to this new reality they hadn't anticipated. "This is—" My adopted daughter tried again, her voice struggling to maintain its professional warmth. "This is wonderful news. Congratulations." The words sounded hollow, rehearsed, empty of actual emotion. "Thank you," I said, accepting it without acknowledging the falseness. The waiter appeared, breaking the tension temporarily. Menus were distributed with practiced efficiency. Water was poured into glasses. My son asked for apple juice in a voice that was polite but clear. The waiter nodded and disappeared, grateful for a simple request in a room that suddenly felt complicated. "So," my adopted son said, forcing brightness into his tone, trying to recover control of the evening. "We asked you here because we wanted to talk about family." There was the word again. Family. The word they had avoided for years suddenly appearing with uncomfortable frequency, deployed like a tool rather than expressed as a feeling. I waited, said nothing, let the silence stretch. "We've been reflecting," my adopted daughter added, picking up the thread, "working in coordination. About how distant we've been, how we haven't prioritized staying connected. That was wrong of us." "Was it?" I said. Not a question. A statement that invited them to continue, to keep explaining, to dig themselves deeper. "Yes, and we want to do better, be better. We're family, after all." My son received his juice and drank it carefully, using both hands to hold the glass steady, concentrating on not spilling. He set it down with visible satisfaction at having completed the task successfully. What changed? I asked, my voice still mild, still neutral, giving nothing away. They looked at each other. Some unspoken communication passed between them, some agreement about who would speak next, what strategy to employ. We grew up, my adopted son said finally. We realized what's important. When did this realization occur? Another glance exchanged. Recently? How recently? Does it matter? My adopted daughter's voice carried the faintest edge now, the first crack in her professional composure. We're here now. We're trying. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking softly. You're trying now? After 28 years and 31 years of life? After years of minimal contact? After holidays spent separately? After birthdays acknowledged with cards bought at convenience stores? After ignoring me for months at a time unless you needed something specific? You're trying now. We know we messed up, my adopted son said, his voice taking on a pleading quality. We're asking for another chance. To do what? To be a real family. I looked at them both, at their expensive clothes that I had indirectly funded through the education and opportunities I provided, at their styled hair and maintained appearances and all the external markers of success that meant nothing about character, at the performance they were giving, rehearsed, and coordinated. And what, I asked quietly, do you think a real family looks like? The question hung in the air between us, unanswered. The silence stretched longer this time. My adopted son shifted in his seat, the movement betraying discomfort his face tried to hide. My adopted daughter took a long drink of water, using the action to buy time, to formulate a response that would sound genuine. It means being there, she said finally, setting down the glass with careful precision. Supporting each other, spending time together, actually caring about each other's lives. Interesting definition, I said, my tone remaining neutral, factual. When was the last time you supported me? Silence again, the kind that answers questions without words. When was the last time you spent time with me that wasn't transactional? That wasn't fulfilling an obligation or asking for something? More silence. They looked at their hands, at the table, at anything except me. When, I continued, my voice still quiet, still calm, giving them space to feel the weight of each question. Was the last time either of you asked about my life beyond surface pleasantries? When did you last inquire about my work, my health, my emotional state in any meaningful way? My adopted son's jaw tightened. His hands formed fists on the table, then deliberately relaxed. We're trying to move forward, not dwell on the past. The past is relevant. It informs the present. It explains why we're sitting here having this conversation in this particular way. Fine. His voice sharpened, edges appearing in the professional polish. You want honesty? We didn't feel close to you. You were always distant, formal. You provided things, sure. You paid for everything, but you never really connected with us emotionally. Did you try to connect with me? We were kids. You were kids, then teenagers, then adults in your 20s, then adults approaching 30. At what point does responsibility shift? At what age do children become accountable for maintaining relationships with their parents? My adopted daughter leaned forward, her elbows on the table, her face earnest in a way that looked practiced. Look, this isn't productive. We came here to bridge gaps, not assign blame. We're acknowledging our part in the distance. We want to fix it. And why now? I asked. Specifically now. Specifically this week. Specifically 4 days after public financial disclosures revealed information about my net worth. Neither answered. The silence had a different quality now. Trapped, cornered. Could it be related to the financial disclosures that became public 4 days ago? I asked, making the connection explicit, removing any ambiguity. My adopted son's face flushed red. That's insulting. Is it? Yes. We're not here because of money. Then why are you here? We told you. Family. I reached into my briefcase, the leather soft and expensive under my hands. I pulled out the folder, the one I had placed there this morning after meeting with Whitfield, set it on the table between us with a soft sound that seemed loud in the quiet room. The label was visible, clear, impossible to misread. Trust documents. This, I said, keeping my voice level and factual, is my estate plan. Updated, finalized, legally binding as of 2 hours ago. Their eyes fixed on the folder like magnets finding metal. I could see them trying to read through the cover, trying to guess what was inside, what those documents contained that I had deemed important enough to bring to this dinner. Inside, I continued, speaking slowly and clearly so there could be no misunderstanding, You'll find a complete structure outlining the distribution of all assets upon my passing: property, investments, intellectual property rights, retirement accounts, everything I've built over 30 years of work, every system I designed, every patent I hold, every dollar I accumulated. My adopted daughter's hand moved toward the folder, fingers extending. I pulled it back slightly, just out of reach, making her stop mid-motion. "Let me save you the trouble of reading," I said. "Let me summarize the key points so there's no ambiguity, no room for misinterpretation. There's one beneficiary, singular, my biological son, the child sitting next to me, the child you didn't know existed until 20 minutes ago." The color drained from both their faces simultaneously, as if controlled by a single switch. "He inherits everything, 100%. No contingencies, no split inheritance, no provisions for other parties. When I pass, whether that's tomorrow or in 40 years, everything goes to him." "You can't be serious," my adopted son said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm completely serious. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. We're your children too. Are you?" The question was simple, direct. 2 words that carried the weight of 17 years. They had no answer because we all knew the truth. They had never acted like my children. I had never been treated like their father. "Legally," I continued, filling the silence they couldn't, "adoptive children have no automatic inheritance rights. This surprises many people, but it's true. Adoption creates legal relationships for custody and responsibility, but inheritance is separate. I could have included you. The law allows it. I chose not to." My adopted daughter's hands were shaking now, trembling where they rested on the table. "Because we didn't call you Dad? Because we weren't warm enough? You're going to erase us over hurt feelings?" "I'm not erasing you. You erased yourselves. Years ago. Through consistent, deliberate distance, through treating me like an obligation rather than a person, through remembering I existed only when convenient or necessary. That's not fair. Isn't it? Let's review the evidence. Let's look at the data objectively. In the past 5 years, how many times have you visited without being asked? How many times have you called just to talk, without needing something? How many times have you shown interest in my life beyond obligatory check-ins?" Neither spoke. The answer was obvious to everyone in the room. "I'll answer for you. 0. Not once, not a single time. You visited when summoned. You called on designated holidays. You showed interest never." My son finished his juice and set down the glass carefully, proud of not spilling a drop. He looked up at me with clear, trusting eyes. "Can we order food now?" "Soon," I said gently, my tone transforming completely when I addressed him, softening in a way it never did with the others. I turned back to them. "For 4 years, I've been raising him, alone, every midnight feeding when he was an infant, every doctor's appointment, every milestone, every first word and first step and first day of preschool. I did that without asking you for help because I knew what the answer would be. Distance, excuses, the same patterns you've maintained since you were old enough to choose." "We didn't know," my adopted daughter said, her voice breaking slightly, cracks appearing in the professional facade. "If you had told us, would it have mattered? Be honest, really honest. Would you have shown up? Would you have been present? Would you have changed any of your behaviors or patterns?" No answer, because we all knew the truth. "I used preserved embryos from my late wife, your adoptive mother, the woman who spent years trying to make you feel like family, who invested everything in building a connection you never fully reciprocated. She left behind 7 embryos, frozen, waiting. She left behind a chance for me to have what I never had with you, a child who looks at me and sees a father. Not a provider, not an obligation, not a name without warmth. A father." My adopted son stood abruptly, his chair scraping loud against the floor. "So that's it? Years together mean nothing?" "They meant something when she was alive, when she was doing all the emotional work, when she was the bridge between us. After she passed, you made your choice clear. You chose distance. You chose minimal contact. You chose to treat me like a resource rather than a person. I'm simply honoring that choice. I'm accepting what you demonstrated through your actions." "This is revenge." "No, this is clarity. Revenge would be petty. Revenge would be emotional. This is practical. This is logical. I'm leaving my legacy to someone who actually wants it, someone who sees me as more than a financial resource, someone who, at 4 years old, shows me more genuine affection than you've shown in 17 years. "We can change," my adopted daughter said desperately, her voice rising, losing its professional control. "We can do better. Give us a chance. You had chances. Hundreds of them. Thousands. Every birthday I spent alone. Every holiday I celebrated in silence. Every milestone you missed. Every call you didn't make. Every visit you cut short. Those were chances. Each one was an opportunity to choose differently. You chose consistency. You chose distance every time. I closed the folder and placed it back in my briefcase with deliberate slowness, the action final and irreversible. The trust is irrevocable. That means it cannot be changed. The structure is final. My attorney has filed all necessary documents with appropriate authorities. When I pass, everything goes to my son, my biological son, the child who shares my late wife's genetic legacy. "You're really doing this," my adopted son said, his voice hollow, empty of everything except disbelief. "I already did it. This dinner was courtesy. Professional notification. I could have let you find out after my passing, let you discover it when the will was read, let it be a complete surprise. I chose to tell you now, in person, face to face, so there would be no ambiguity, no confusion, no room for lawyers to claim you didn't understand." "Courtesy?" His laugh was bitter, harsh. "You ambush us with your secret kid and cut us out of your life, and you call that courtesy. I call it honesty, something we should have practiced years ago, something that might have changed this outcome if it had been present in our relationship from the beginning." I stood and lifted my son from his chair. He wrapped arms around my neck immediately, comfortable and secure, the embrace automatic and unthinking. "Enjoy your dinner," I said. "It's already paid for. Order whatever you want. The bill is covered." I walked toward the door. Behind me, I heard my adopted daughter's voice, choked and desperate, breaking completely. "Please, don't do this." I paused at the threshold but didn't turn around, didn't look back. Looking back would weaken the moment, would create opening for negotiation that I had no intention of entertaining. "You did this," I said quietly but clearly. "Years ago, when you chose convenience over connection, when you chose distance over family, when you chose to remember me only when my net worth became public knowledge. You made this. Every choice, every missed call, every shortened visit, every card without a personal message. You built this outcome. I'm just acknowledging it." I opened the door and walked into the hallway, my son's breath warm against my shoulder, his small hand patting my back gently, instinctively offering comfort without understanding why it might be needed. We descended the stairs together, his weight comfortable in my arms. The restaurant noise rose to meet us as we left the insulated quiet of the second floor. Laughter, conversation, the ordinary sound of people who chose to be together, who valued each other's presence. Outside, the night air was cool and clear. I carried my son to the car and buckled him into his seat with practiced efficiency. He looked up at me with sleepy contentment, the late hour catching up with him. "Are we going home now?" "Yes." "Can we have dinner there?" "Absolutely." "Good. I like our dinners better." I closed his door and walked around to the driver's side. Through the restaurant's glass front, I could see other families eating together. Real families, built on choice and consistency and the daily practice of showing up. I got in the car and started the engine, my hand steady on the wheel. Behind me, in that private dining room on the second floor, two people sat at an untouched table, finally understanding what they had lost, finally grasping the consequences of 17 years of chosen distance. But I didn't think about them. I drove home, where my son waited in the back seat, where his bedroom glowed with warm light, where dinner would be simple and shared and real. I drove toward the life I had built deliberately, with full awareness and complete intentionality. 22 million in assets, 30 years of work, one clear beneficiary. Not because of bitterness or anger or revenge, because love, real love, isn't performed when convenient or deployed when profitable. It's practiced daily, quietly, consistently, in the small moments that build a foundation. And I had finally found someone who understood that instinctively, who lived it naturally, who gave it freely without calculation or condition. We pulled into the driveway. The house lights welcomed us home. My son woke as I opened his door, reaching for me with complete trust, with the absolute certainty that I would be there to catch him. "What's for dinner?" he asked, his voice soft with remaining sleep. "Whatever you want," I said, lifting him out. He smiled that small, genuine smile children give when the world still makes sense, when adults still seem reliable, when home still means safety. "Can you make your special pasta?" "I can." We walked inside together, leaving behind the restaurant, the dinner, the people who finally realized too late what it means to be family.